What happens when law, business, and life collide? Each week on Lead Counsel, your host Tom Tona will take a deep dive into topics related to the law, the business of law, and life. There will be insightful discussions with industry insiders, experts, and thought leaders making significant contributions and meaningful differences in their fields of expertise. Tom is the founder and managing attorney at TonaLaw. He has been a practicing attorney since 1994 and the leader of TonaLaw since it opened in 2001. The goal of this podcast is to provide you with free information on law and the business of law, and to give you actionable tools related to each of these areas. Now, here's Tom.
Hey, welcome to the Lead Counsel Podcast. It's your host, Tom Tona. I have my good friend Juliet here. What's going on, Jules?
Welcome back, everybody.
Jules, today's special guest is Marco Brown. He is the owner of Brown Family Law out of Utah, and he's probably got the largest law firm in Utah at this point. And I know that he's going to be going nationwide in the near future. Marco has a really fascinating journey, which we're going to get into deep dive. So without further ado, here's Marco. What's up, Marco? How are you?
Hey, doing well, man. It's good to be here.
I appreciate you coming on. I'm not joking when I say that you've inspired a bunch of things with me, which we'll go through in the podcast, that you probably don't even know you influence. So I feel like I owe you a thank you, and I'm excited to have you on and kind of go through the different things that you're working on and you know, where you see everything going. So Welcome to the podcast. So just a little bit of history, because like right out of the gate, I found it fascinating, and I know a little bit about your story, but you grew up in Alaska, right?
Yeah, I didn't just grow up in Alaska. There are different gradations in Alaska. So there's like Anchorage that's kind of like living in small Seattle or something, right? You know, but I grew up in the boonies in Alaska, on the Aleutian Peninsula, in a village of 85 people. My dad ran a salmon hatchery. My mom was an air traffic controller. And my dad built the hatchery for the state of Alaska, and he built it on the best area for the salmon, which was also where all the grizzly bears came to eat the salmon. So like I'd walk out and there were grizzlies literally in the front yard. We had a shotgun next to the door, and we would shoot them in the rear end with the shotgun every once in a while to make them go away. Like this was just normal stuff when I was a kid. That's how I grew up.
That's amazing. So I'll tell you, I don't know what it is. I'm fascinated with the survival shows about Alaska. I love the mountains, but that's pretty hardcore, man. Like, and how do you think that's influenced who you are today? It has to give you a different thought process than somebody like me or Jules, who grew up in the suburbs in New York.
Yeah. So it absolutely does. I'll give kind of a general outline, then give one specific example. So kind of general outline, I spent a lot of time alone, right? My parents, if it had been in a city, they absolutely would have been thrown in prison because I should have been dead like a whole bunch of times, right? They would just let me go out, and there were animals all over the place and everything. But that was just that's what you do up there. So I spent huge amounts of time alone, hunting, fishing, playing with my dogs, exploring. So that kind of, you know, the prefrontal cortex, that executive functioning really developed early on because I would just go out there and do my thing. And then I didn't have anybody to talk to. So I would like literally talk with myself and I would just work out stuff in my head. And then as a lawyer, that was really handy, because something I do that I thought all lawyers did, but apparently they don't, is when I get ready for oral argument, I sit there and I just talk with myself. I like literally talk through the argument, or I stand in front of a mirror and I give the argument as if I were giving it to the judge. And I thought this was like normal stuff, but apparently a lot of attorneys don't do that. And that was a direct representation of my upbringing there in Alaska. And then the other kind of more specific thing is, this is funny and slightly political, but I, for the life of me, cannot understand why people in the lower 48, which is what we call the continental United States, why people in the lower 48 have problems with guns. Everybody had a gun. I took guns to school. I took guns to Walmart. I took guns to Pizza Hut. Like everyone had a gun. Like everyone had a gun at the bar. Everyone had a gun everywhere, and no one shot anybody else, right? Like, so I just, for the life of me, cannot get why everybody has such problems with guns.
Well, it's probably because you grow up in a completely different experience, right? Like people open their doors out here and you run into like a UPS guy, but
Not grizzly bears.
You ain't running into a grizzly bear that will literally eat you, right? So yeah, it's just a different world. Like, and it's talk about building resilience. I mean, you got to probably be one of the most resilient cats I know at this point, based on just on that experience. And then, after kind of parsing out a lot of the stuff you post online, you are who you are. You kind of wear it on your sleeve and you live out loud. And I love that saying, by the way. So, okay. So you grow up in a population of 85 people, right? Mm-hmm. And did you go to high school? I see a note here that
I never graduated from high school. So I went to high school. So when I was 13, we moved into Anchorage. And Anchorage at that point is maybe 250,000 people, I think. So I go to high school there in a fairly typical, like 2,100 kid high school, and I despise it. I wasn't a good teenager. Like I was a terrible teenager, and I hated high school. I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be in college. So what that meant was I just didn't really do anything. So I ended up just leaving early, and then I had to get my GED so I could go to college later on.
So what brought you to law school of all things, where it's like school on steroids?
Yeah. So I always liked school. That was the funny part about it, was I liked school a lot. And I was a pretty precocious kid, but I just didn't like high school. Like high school was super boring to me, and I didn't like the people around me. And it was my fault. It was totally my fault, right? I should have made more of that opportunity, but I didn't. But when I was a kid, what brought me to law school was my grandmother, really. So my grandmother was a PhD, and she was a professor back when women didn't do that sort of thing. Still, the smartest woman I've ever met in my entire life is my grandmother. She was just like effortlessly intelligent, right? Just one of those people that's super down to earth, but also the brightest person in the room. So from the time I was about 8, I knew that I was going to get some sort of professional degree, as a PhD, or be a lawyer, or be a doctor, or something like that, because that's what my grandma did. And that was kind of the expectation of the family. And then my dad happened to be a really bright guy. My mom was intelligent as well. So it just seemed like the thing you did. And yeah, when it came time to figure out what to do, I was either going to be a psychologist like my grandma, or I was going to go to law school. And I figured out that I was going to be a way better lawyer than I was going to be a psychologist.
That's awesome. So what made you think you'd be a better lawyer than a psychologist?
I really got some a-hole running through me, is what it is. Like, I'm a litigator.
Honestly, you need a little psychology background, especially for the type of law that you're in. You deal with such high emotions all day long, I assume. So it probably helped having that psychological background.
And Jules, just to add to what Marco's talking about, so we're hiring a trial attorney right now, and I've tried cases. It's a very unique personality, right? When he said, I've got some a-hole running through you. So sometimes the litigators in the office are not the most popular. Listen, there are some really great litigators, but if you're a trial attorney, especially in the space that Marco's playing in, which is family law, and you're trying a lot of cases, which I believe you are, right, Marco? You're still trying cases.
I don't try cases anymore. I tried a lot of them, but I do the business side of things now.
Yeah, and that's I made that same switch over, but that side of you never goes away. It's always there, right?
No,
like that's who you are.
Dude. No,
for good or bad, right? I always tell people, like, I have a certain skill set that I stay in my office a lot behind soundproof doors, and then I get called out on an as-needed basis. So I completely understand what you're talking about when you talk about that. So when did you become a lawyer, Marco?
2004. Wait, no. Started law school in 2004, graduated in 2007, clerked for a year with judges in Iowa to get some litigation experience from the judges' side of things, and then became a lawyer after that. And
then you worked for a firm before opening your own shop?
Yeah, I did. Oh, man. And for all the young attorneys out here, this is something to learn. Your first job out of law school, I don't consider the clerking job the first job out of law school. That was like graduate school for lawyers. But my first job out of law school was at an insurance defense firm. And your first job out of law school is really to learn what type of lawyer you don't want to be and what type of law you don't want to do. Right. And that's what I learned there was, I hate this place and I'm a terrible employee and I don't want to act like these attorneys. I mean, they were perfectly nice people and whatnot. They weren't my people.
What made you opt on family law when you were in insurance defense?
Yeah. So one was I wanted to do anything other than insurance defense. So it was wide open at that point. And the reason I talk about that first experience, that first job, is that it really did, like, I'm not the human being I was back then, right? Like, that really taught me some things. And I changed my personality to a large degree after that and kind of my trajectory. But how I got into family law was I leave the insurance defense firm, and my wife and I come to Utah, and this is 2010, so it's like in the middle of the Great Recession, and no one's hiring, like nobody. If you remember that time,
I do.
Large law firms in New York, Miami, Chicago were like going under, completely going under. So no one's hiring, and no one's hiring me because I'm a terrible employee. So I have to just do my own thing, right? I'm like, all right, let's do this. And then I did everything under the sun. And this lady came to me, she was a friend. She came to me and said, hey, my husband is cheating on me. I need to get divorced. Can you help me out? And I said, sure. And then I spent 3 o'clock, I read until 3 o'clock in the morning the night before we were to meet because I didn't know anything about divorce at all in Utah. And by the, 9 o'clock the next morning, I knew more than I knew the day before and helped her out. I really liked it. Like, it made me feel good inside. I liked the interaction. It was like nothing I'd ever quite felt as an attorney. And then people just kept coming in for that, right? And then I got better at it. And it's easy to like what you're good at. And I just got better and better. And then it was all I did.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting trajectory, right? Because I went out into plaintiff's work, kind of similar, very early on in my career. I thought I wanted to do real estate and transactional, which I was bored out of my mind. And then I went into plaintiff's work and I was like, oh, I found home. Like, I just knew it was what I wanted to do. So in 2010, you opened up Brown Family Law, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was just Brown Law back then, but yeah, it became Brown Law.
And if I remember correctly, you were a trust fund baby. You had $1 million in trust and you were good to go, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then, there's a lesson for everyone to learn as well. I had zero, like literally $0. What were we in debt at that point? $160,000 in debt. 2015, we bumped that up to $450,000 in debt. But I had no network, no money, no connections, a new state, everything. And if I can make it work, because I was really bad at this for the first 5 or 6 years. If I can make it work with none of those things, everybody can make it work. Like, you can leave the job you hate and start your own thing and you'll be okay. It'll be rough for a little bit, but you'll be okay. Like that's the principle that you need to take from it.
Yeah, I just think it's also knowing yourself really well, right? Like, people say to me, where does the confidence come from? And I'm like, well, it's really confidence in my skill set. And I think that's what you're saying is you went out on basically a wing and a prayer, but you knew your skill set, right? And that probably does tie to your Alaska upbringing, believe it or not, because if you can wander the woods as a kid in the wilds of Alaska, well, you'll probably be fine wandering through the courthouse, right? Like, you can figure the rest out.
Yeah, you're going to figure it out, right? That's the whole thing. I was asked by somebody the other day, because I have a pretty big vision for where I want to go with things in this law firm over the next 10 years. And the question was, how are you going to do that? And the answer is, I don't have any idea. But I've never had any idea. Like, no one has any idea how they're going to do any of this stuff. Like, you just go figure it out.
Yeah, you do the best you can every day. I will say you have a really ambitious goal. It's kind of similar to mine, but and you've said it publicly before, I think on LinkedIn at least, which is you want to be a $75 million law firm in 10 years, correct? Did that vision come to you as a result of EOS or some type of other work that you were doing? It's a very crystal clear vision, and I love that. So how did you get to that goal?
So mine is Grant Cardone. So I bought in with Grant, his general philosophy on things, and I've done a lot of work with his team, and that was a direct result of what's called a platform. So it's a scaling platform and kind of vision work with his team.
That's awesome. You and I have talked offline about different coaching, and I've done a ton. But yeah, understanding like there are certain personalities, I actually share that with you as well, where my wife is like, when is it ever enough? And I'm like, dude, there is no option for me but to scale.
Yep.
And the day I die is the day I'm done scaling the operations of this law firm and the level of service we can provide, kind of countrywide, if you will.
So it's funny, you talk about it that way. We use different words for the same thing. So my thing is, when people ask me when is enough, I say, you don't understand who I am. Like, enough is never enough, right?
And I do. I understand that.
Yeah, this isn't about numbers. Like, it is about numbers. I like money, but it's not about numbers. It's not about, the money. It's not about the people you serve. It's about the self-actualization, right? It's the progress of self and the progress of those around you and building people up. And then, when people ask me if I'm ever going to retire, like, yeah, my retirement is when God puts me in a body bag. That's what my retirement is.
Right. And if you're the CEO of the firm, somebody sent me an email yesterday and said, why not send this? I have an article we're using in the firm for something. Why not send it to the defense attorneys you're friendly with? I'm like, I don't have files. So the last time I've had an interaction with a defense attorney, other than if it was like a multi-7-figure case, just to have a conversation about it, I'm not doing that stuff, right? So once you're the CEO, you can actually really do that for a very long time. And also, if you do it right, hire a CEO at some point. Now you're just a passive investor in your own entity that you've built. So I get that mindset. Yeah. And that's why I think Jules was smiling when you said it, because when you said it's never enough, my face lit up. I was like, him and I are brothers from another mother. I get it, man. So talk a little bit about those initial years, because you said, look, I started out with nothing in the whole 450,000, because there's a lot of people that listen to this that are 20 years behind you and I, right? I've been doing it almost 30 years, and I've been where you're talking about as well. Describe those early years, like with you and your wife, because I think that the other thing is you have a really special spouse, and that's a key decision that you make in your life that contributes to your business success. I'm lucky. I have the same thing. So talk about those early years.
Yeah, exactly. And for those out there, if you don't have a support person, a spouse, or somebody who's going to back your play, then if you're trying to do big things, it's going to be almost impossible. Right? Humans just don't do big things on their own. They do it with help from other people. And that is my wife, Dem. She has always believed in me for some weird reason. Like, I don't think I'm a good bet, but she's always bet on me. And she did in those early years, right? We get up here in 2010. We have nothing, deeply in debt, and I don't know anything. And she just went with it. I said, hey, I'm going to start my own firm. She said, great, you'll be fine. I'm like, okay. But those first 5 or 6 years, I call them walking through hell, because I literally walked through hell. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to get paid. I figured out how to be a good attorney, though. That was the one thing, is I really cared about my clients, and I really tried extraordinarily hard. And being an attorney isn't really difficult for me. Like, it's how my brain works. It's why I became an attorney. So that was the one thing I was good at, but all the other stuff I was terrible at. And, if you're a really good attorney, but you're bad at all the other stuff, it doesn't matter how good an attorney you are, your life is going to be horrible. It's going to be hell, right? And my life was hell for 5 or 6 years.
The other side being the business side you're talking about.
Yes, the business of law. Yep.
And what year was it that you had the epiphany of, I better become a businessman and real fast?
It's called the Great Shower Incident of 2015, because it happens in 2015.
Tell us about it. 5 years into your own practice, how many years as a lawyer?
At that point, 7 years as a lawyer.
Okay. 7 years as an attorney. Tell me about the Great Shower Incident.
Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times I have shared this, and then people come up to me afterward and say, oh my goodness, I had the same experience, right? So I think a lot of attorneys have the same kind of thing. So I really enjoy taking showers. Like, I dig them. And during this period of time, I would get in the shower, and then I'd be cool for 5 minutes, and then I'd start thinking about cases, and then bad stuff would start happening. Like, I'd get headaches, and my chest would start to constrict, and my heart would palpitate, and, So this happens on the regular. But one day it happens, I'm taking a shower, and I just know, it's going to happen, because it's happened so many times before. I start getting this stress headache that starts on the crown of my head, and it envelops my face by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm just thinking, oh man, it's going to happen again. And then this one was different though, because I was shown my future, and I was shown my funeral when I was 60 or 65. I couldn't quite tell which. but I was dead in a casket and I was being mourned by children I didn't have at that point. I was literally dead. And, I saw this, like I see the chair sitting in front of me, right? And that lasts for about 10 seconds or 15 seconds. And then I get out of it. And I thought to myself, nope, that's not going to happen. I'm not going out like that, man. So at that point, that was the impetus for, I have to change literally everything because this is going to go real bad real quick if I keep on this path.
It's like you got scared straight in the shower. Like, literally.
Yeah.
So what did you do once you had the epiphany? What did you do once you had the epiphany and said, I got to become something different?
Yeah. So then what you do, other people do. What I did is I sit down and I start thinking, right? I'm a pretty analytical guy. So I sit down and I think, okay, I have all of these problems, and I just start naming them off. And then I think, I should probably solve these problems, but there are too many problems because there are like 1,000 problems. There are too many problems. So what's the one problem that I can solve that might solve a whole bunch of the other problems? And I thought about that for a long time, and I came up with an answer, which was to get paid 100% for the work I was already doing, because I was getting paid like maybe 50 cents on the dollar. And I thought, okay, well, let's give that a try. Like, there's nothing bad that can come from that, and maybe it solves a whole bunch of other problems. So then I thought to myself, okay, now I have to come up with a system in order to make that happen. So how do I make that happen? And I created the system and kind of tweaked it and experimented with it. And it solved a lot of problems. It solved a tremendous amount of problems.
Getting paid will do that, right?
Yep.
Getting paid will do that. It's funny because we all had that epiphany moment if you own your own law firm, which was you remember exactly where you were when you were like, something needs to change.
So it was an iterative process for me. So I thought, okay, let's solve this problem. And then I solved that problem. And then I thought, oh, wow, that actually works out really well. Maybe I can solve the bigger problem, which is I have 112 active case files and my brain is scrambled. So maybe I can solve that problem by hiring some people and seeing what that is like. And then I did that. And then I figured out I really liked that, and I made more money and worked less, and my stress level went way down. And I thought, oh, well, if I can do that once or twice, I can do that 10 times or 50 times. So then then I kind of moved into that, like, okay, now what do I need to become in order to be a CEO of a law firm and not do cases anymore? Because that ultimately became my vision. But for me, that took a while, right? It wasn't like the epiphany at the beginning.
But that's great that it actually happened had you started the Grant Cardone coaching yet?
No. So at that point, when did I get into Grant? I think I got into Grant somewhere around 2019, because that point, what comes of that is you realize when you go through this process, and I'm sure, Tom, that you went through the same thing, that you get away from litigation and you realize that when you own a business, you have to sell and sell effectively. Otherwise, nothing works, right?
Preach.
So I realized that I was incredibly bad at this thing called sales. Like, it was good when I was in front of a judge, but I was horribly bad at every other aspect of it in front of every other person. So I thought, okay, well, I need to get better at this. And how do I get better at this? And the answer for that, for me, is always I read books until I kind of figure some stuff out. So I thought, all right, what am I going to read? So I start reading books. And then I happened upon Sell or Be Sold by Grant Cardone. And I thought, oh, okay, this guy actually knows what he's talking about. And then from there, I bought The Closer Survival Guide, which is the best business book I've ever read. I've read it 24 times. I have read it more often. This is terrible, but I've read it more often by a significant number than the scriptures that I believe come from my God. Let's put it that way.
Okay. That says a lot, man. That says a lot.
It really does. It's also a shorter book. But anyway, like, it was that transformative. And that's where I really started to learn the sales and the closing part of this that enables kind of everything else. So, if you want to run a law firm, you have to make that switch. There are no successful law firm owners that I know that aren't also incredibly effective sales and closing people.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I always loved to sell. I think I've been selling since like the third grade. So that came very natural. And that's why when you talk about it, I love when you post stuff and then people are like, that's awful that you would think about money or sales. And I'm like, oh my God, that person's going to work for me forever, that person.
That's exactly right.
Or they're going to work for Marco, or because they don't get it. Like, you got to be able to sell. But I think the difference is, Marco, I think we're very similar in a lot of ways, but I do think that the difference is that I sell, but I have systems to make sure that I deliver. I refuse to be the sell and repent. And there's a lot of those attorneys out there too, and just salespeople in general. And I hate that sell and repent, get the retainer in the door. And I think that's what does set you apart, is you believe in excellence as a marketing strategy as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Excellent. Yeah, exactly. You have to, I mean, look, if you want to make some money as an attorney, like middle class money, go work for somebody else. Okay. Maybe upper class money, but middle class money. Yeah. If you want to make a lot of money as an attorney, then you learn how to sell effectively and close. And if you want to make extraordinary amounts of money, then you learn how to be excellent at the legal side of things, and you learn how to sell and close.
How long have you been pure CEO?
Since just before COVID, if I remember correctly. I think the last case I took to trial, and I had to do it because the case had been around for years, and I was the only one with the historical knowledge of it to actually try it, was 6 months into COVID, if I remember correctly. So 2020.
Man, you picked a good time to become that CEO with all those challenges, man. Holy cow.
Yeah.
And now you have visions of like expanding your firm outside of just Utah. So what is your process for becoming a national firm rather than just in your state?
Yeah, I'm very interested in hearing that.
That's a great question. So I've thought through going to other states, and I've thought through it for years, but I've never pulled the trigger on it. And I'm not entirely sure why, because I have this plan in my head. But that was what I did at the last Max Law, was I had to talk through that because there's a block there. And this really goes to, for everybody out there, that, if you have a plan and the plan's going to work, but you just can't wrap your head around it, like you can't make yourself do it, then there's something in your brain that's keeping you back, right? And I just voiced that to everybody. And what I think I came up with, honestly, was that I've been successful in what I've done, and we're bigger than everybody else in Utah by a stripe at this point. And people are like really nice and complimentary to me all the time. And I think I just like it too much, right? Like, I forgot what it was like to absolutely suck at something for a long period of time. And there's a fair amount of fear in that. Like, you don't want to go back to that place. And I think I've been kind of in that space in my head. So the answer to your question is I have a plan. We can talk about it, but that's not even the most important part. The most important part is that you just allow yourself to fail or be okay with failure, and then you can do stuff, right? Then you can experiment. Then you can implement your plan. Because I've been too fearful of that for too long, and I literally had to tell myself, you know what, dude? If it doesn't work, who cares? Like, just go fail anyway, right? Like, you've gotten too used to people saying nice things about you. Just go out there and fail. Like, do something and mess it up. So,
and it's almost like starting over. So I can definitely see the fear in that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's been my thing. But really, the technical answer to the question is we just take our system here, because our system works. The sales system, especially, like, is very, very well developed at this point, and then we just go replicate it somewhere else. Now, the tough part is finding the attorney to use, right? The attorney to acquire, right, and make a partner in that new space. But really, it's just a replication of what we've done here. We're just going to move over there because we have the sales side of things. We have the documents. We have the way we interact with clients and systemic communication. We have the way we interact with colleagues, which is a huge thing for me. Like, it's massive for me how we treat colleagues and so forth. And, marketing, we got that stuff, right? We can just plug and play and then figure things out. So that's what we'll do. It's just, when am I going to get over myself to do it?
Once you make the decision and you do it once and you don't fail, the rest is just game on. And I know some stuff about those multi-state offices. There's one firm that's open in like 50 states, right, in personal injury. some of those offices don't perform well, but a lot of them perform really well. And it becomes a hedge fund portfolio of law firms, basically.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's actually really super interesting, I think, for people to realize is that the experimentation that has to go on. So I was talking with a PI attorney here, and they're in multiple states, right? And I thought that they had opened in states and then they grew slowly and done well and so forth. But no, like they just go seed this firm in other places and they see what works and what doesn't. So, they've opened offices and they go kaput after 6 months, right? And then there's one, in Oregon, like smaller town in Oregon, and they figured out that LSAs brought them like 300 good clients in like 3 months.
There's a whole practice right there.
I wish.
Right? But they didn't have any idea. They just made it up and they like went with it and it worked. So they shut some down and, they go in the crapper, and then these other ones, like they function. And I said, you have absolutely no idea what was going to work, did he? He's like, no, I have no idea what was going to work. I just go do it.
Right. And then, but it's easy to talk about after the fact, right? Everybody goes, well, he must have. No, a lot of times it's just trial and error. Like, we have a friend together, mutual friend, Billy Tarasio. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that she thought she was going to do on TikTok what she's doing on TikTok, to the point where she was able to shut all of her other marketing down, stop the SEO rat race, and just blow up her TikTok presence, right? So, yeah, I think the biggest thing is start small with an idea, maybe canvas the areas that you're thinking about, and then all of a sudden, it's just a matter of, does the marketing take hold? And do you have the right people manning that office or staffing that office to make the sausage, as they say, right? To actually grind out the New York files or wherever you'd be thinking about going, right? I can tell you that knowing the New York market really well, there's a ton of space in the New York market, right in Long Island. There's one main guy. And I love James, and he's a good friend. And because he does excellent work, for years I've been referring him. God, I probably send them 2-3 cases a month, right? Yeah. And I think about you a lot, because I tell him, I'm like, keep an eye out on this guy, James, because he's a good friend. I'm like, check out what Marco's doing. He's making moves out there, out west, and don't be surprised if you see him in New York sooner or later, right?
Boy, I got to say, New York's a tough sell for me, man.
Well, I don't blame you. Especially you come from the country. It's the last place you probably want to be.
California, Illinois, New York, although these are my politics, man. Like those blue states are tough sells for me.
I know.
They're tough sells. Like we did a market analysis of where we're likely to expand, and Arizona is the first. Arizona just makes sense. My mom lives down there. My dad died recently, but my mom still lives down there. So that makes the most sense. But, they asked me, like, do you want us to look at California? I'm like, absolutely not. I want nothing to do with their money. Like, give me red states in the South.
Right.
Like,
the issue for me is, like, politics-wise, the blue states are the most plaintiff-friendly, right?
Yeah,
so
that's true.
So down in Florida, they passed tort reform, and, I talk to people from Florida, and they're like, oh, my God, it's awful down here right now. We're looking at other states. A lot of them are coming to New York now with their law firms as plaintiffs. Again, because of the politics of the way it impacts what we do.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a good thing to realize that where you expand and how you do things is really dependent on what you do. Because what you do, Tom, and what I do, we're both attorneys and we both are CEOs of law firms. But what you do is not law to me, and what I do is not law to you. Like we inhabit completely different worlds, and we have to market differently. We have to think differently. We have to interact with our people differently. Like my numbers and what I want from my people and how I structure teams and so forth, totally different than yours, right? Like you just have to realize if you want to start a law firm or grow a law firm that you can take information from other people, but you're going to inhabit a completely different economic space than people who do real estate or estate planning or PI or whatever it is.
There's a lot of wisdom to what you're saying, also to the extent that I know that you're a guy who has these firm boundaries, right? And I don't mean law firm boundaries. I mean very defined boundaries of what's acceptable and what's not. So I got to credit you with a couple of things. So you planted something in my head, like, why would an attorney be comfortable giving somebody 150 to 300 files as a personal injury firm, let's say. I look at job ads, they're running 300 files with one attorney and then team of, let's say, paralegals and legal assistants, where your goal was to get it, I believe, at a 50 number for your associates, 50 to 100, a 30. And I was like, I need to start thinking about that. I see the wisdom, because if you want deep dive litigation, you can't do deep dive work at that level of volume. So like the trial attorney role that I'm looking to fill now, I'm like, you will have 10 to 30 files maximum, because the trials I want them trying are 7 and 8 figure trials.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to even look at what he's working on. I'm going to look at the verdicts he's taken, but 10 to 30, that's a maximum caseload. You actually planted that in my head, and I got to give you props for that. Thank you. I appreciate that. The other thing that you have strict boundaries about is that quality of life, right? Mm-hmm. You have what I would call a lifestyle law firm, to the extent that I believe attorneys are not working nights and weekends unless, let's say, they have a trial coming up on a Monday they got to prep for or whatever. But I know you're very strict about those boundaries for your entire team, right? Do I have it right?
Yeah, that's completely correct. I mean, everybody, you're adults, you can do whatever you want, right? But you have to have these sorts of boundaries if you want to have a relatively normal life. And yeah, that's a big thing. I told one of my attorneys when she started here, she was giving out her cell phone number to the clients and talking, and texting them at night. And I said, look, stop that right now. Otherwise, I'm just going to fire you, because I'm going to fire you now, or I'm going to fire you in 6 months when you burn out. So choose. Right. Because, it's just dumb. So yeah, that's a big deal for me. I mean, I know what it's like to have a terrible family life and a terrible spiritual life and a terrible physical life, because I allowed myself to do that, because I had 112 active case files and I was doing everything. It was just stupid. And I don't want that for my attorneys. I don't want to sit around and watch the slow decline of my people. That's not what I'm doing here. Like, I want them to be financially successful. I want them to be successful in their lives, with their spouses and their families. And that's a big, big deal to me. So if it comes down to they're going to make less money, but have quality of life, like that's where I'm going to say you're going to make some less money and you're going to have a better quality of life. And then I'm going to go find attorneys who want that.
Yeah, I mean, I have that hard dividing line as well. We have some intakes that come in after hours where personal injury is a little different, but I really incentivize that heavily, because I know people are financially motivated. But we have a hard stop even on the time that my intake people that want to take the calls because of the financial incentives I attach, and they're going to give better service to the clients. But there is not one person in my office after 5:15, unless it's like an extraordinary thing. And I think people understand, like, that's the exception, not the rule. Like, you go to other law firms and you're working till 7, 8 o'clock at night as a standard thing. I mean, I was talking to a personal injury attorney yesterday. We were going out to lunch. He's a guy that we're referring cases back and forth. When I started, I worked 6 days a week. Saturdays were not optional. And it was back in the days when people would smoke in the office. So I'm going way, way back 30 years ago. But they're sitting in there on a Saturday morning smoking. And I'm like, what has my life become? I'm like 3 years into my career at that point. So I really appreciate that there are people doing what you're doing the way you're doing it, because you're showing there's a better way to do it. Now, contrast that. I know a lot of matrimonial attorneys and family law attorneys, probably because they don't run it like a business, that are on the verge of financial collapse, that are in deep depression, that have actually been almost like suicidal at points. And I feel so bad for them, and I'm like, they just feel like they're prisoners of it. And I think you and James actually have a lot in common, because by doing it the way you're doing it, putting in the reps you're doing on the business side, there's hope that you don't have to do it that way, right? Like, you really are providing a service to lawyers. Even by being on this podcast, some of these lawyers are coming up to me and thanking me for having guests like you that are like, hey, look, it's not easy. Marco put in, a dozen years to become the CEO before he stopped his last file, let's say, right? Yep. And same thing with me. It's probably been about 12 years. But before that, there was another 12 years that I had to study the business of law to perfect the systems, the finances, all of that stuff. So you're providing a valuable service.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate this, and this is one of the reasons that I do things the way I do things. I'll just give a quick example. Like every once in a while, I'll catch hell because I talk the way I talk, because I live out loud, and
I love that saying, man.
My wife and I are buying a villa on 20 acres, 35 minutes south of Bologna in Italy, because I lived in Italy when I was younger, and this has been one of my dreams. Right? I talk about that all the time, and I get people and I wear $5,000 Italian suits because I can, because I love it. Like, that's my jam. I feel like James Bond, great. But I talk about this stuff, and I will catch hell for it. You're being ostentatious and blah blah blah. And I think, no, you don't get it, man. The reason I do this sort of stuff, the reason I talk about success, and the reason I think you, Tom, talk about success, is because we know that we went through absolute hell for years because no one else talked about success. No one else told us how to do it. They all pretended, they either kept it for themselves or they pretended that they were doing well when they were completely depressed and wanted to kill themselves, right? Like, I wanted to kill myself during that time period. And I don't want any of my colleagues to go through that sort of thing. Like, I will just talk about this in hopes that people find it and they may be able to learn something from me and minimize that pain that I felt for all of those years because no one else would show me the way.
I think that it's really important. Now, shift gears with me for a second, because I know that you're a studier of market forces, as any good CEO is, right? Your job is to predict the next decade. What could happen? What might happen? Where do you think it's going to go? So tell me what you're seeing, because I know what I'm seeing, but I would love to hear from you. Like, what are your insights on where you see the current market for legal services going, especially with the advent of AI, right? Like, to me, that's a big needle mover. So
I have a little bit different take on this than a lot of people will. I mean, so Ryan McKean is a mutual friend of ours, and he's on the AI train, right? And we'll use AI in our firm, and I'm figuring that out a little bit more. But I look at it like this. I look at what's called the Lindy effect. So Nassim Taleb talks about this a lot in Skin in the Game and Fooled by Randomness and so forth. He's written all these really, really amazing books. But he always talks about the Lindy effect. And the Lindy effect is the longer an idea has been around or a practice has been around, the longer it will be around. Okay. So if something's been around for 20 years, it's very likely it'll be around for at least 20 more years, right? So if a religion has been around for 1,000 years, it's very likely the religion will be around for 1,000 more years, right? And it came from Broadway, actually. So how long something about on Broadway predicts how long it'll be on Broadway.
Gotcha.
So when I look at this, I'm not a tech guy. Like, I'm not going to invent an app. I'm not going to leverage humongous amounts of technology to grow a law firm, because it's just not me. It's just not what I'm going to do, right? So I thought, all right, well, if I'm not going to do that, then I have to do something that's super Lindy, that's been around for a long time and is going to be around for a very long time. So for me, in family law and in lawyering in general, what's the most Lindy thing that we've ever done? And that's to be a really, really high-level counselor, in-person counselor, and litigator, to go to a trial. Right? You don't always go to trial, but that's the person who will never be outside of the system. Like, AI will never replace that. The Walmart of law firms will never replace that. And there's consolidation coming. Like, we're gonna get capital coming in. These bar associations are going to liberalize this and allow outside investments and so forth. So there's going to be a lot of consolidation coming in probably the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. But the way you ensure that that's not going to overtake you is, one, you're a brand, right? You are a brand, because no one can ever take your brand from you. And two, you do the thing that is most Lindy, and that is to be that high-level, really communicative counselor and litigation attorney. So I looked at that and I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going to come, but I know the thing that's most Lindy, and I'm going to do Lindy.
And you kind of picked the most Lindy area of law.
People are always
going to married. Well, I was going to say married and divorced, but,
but you know what? I mean, I don't know how much the statistics have changed, but I've been hearing 1 out of 2 marriages end in divorce forever.
That is actually that's not correct. So that's an aggregated number based on the number of people who get divorced in a year and the number of people who are married in that year. So it doesn't. They don't correlate at all. It's just somewhere around 25% for the most part. It's never been anywhere near 50%.
That's still a very robust marketplace. A very robust marketplace.
It is. Yeah.
And it's funny because then when they opened up the definition of marriage in a lot of states, I was like, oh, these divorce attorneys should be backing up the Brinks truck because people are still going to get divorced regardless of what the orientation of the marriage is. So,
yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I actually, what's funny is that I disdain marriage, and I don't disdain marriage. I disdain divorce. I really don't like divorce. I've been married for 22 years. My parents were not divorced before my dad died. My in-laws aren't. Like, I don't like it, but unfortunately, I'm good at it. And you do the thing that you're really good at. Like that's the thing. Like, do that thing. Don't do your passion so much as the thing that you're best at. And unfortunately, this happens to be my deal, and it'll never go away.
Listen, you're the man. Thank you so much for coming on. I would have you on anytime. This is the type of stuff, like, I hope to run into you at the masterminds. And if you shoot me a quick note, we can compare what we're doing in 2024, in terms of what you're planning on doing, because I'm very interested in the Grant Cardone stuff as well.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. Let's talk, man. Let's talk offline.
All right.
Great.
Listen, man, thanks again.
So
I appreciate it. And this has been the Lead Counsel Podcast. Listen wherever podcasts are distributed. Thanks, Marco.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, brother.